Hey there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have 3 cards using the My Favorite Things set called Ready, Set, Snow. And they're all 3 interactive cards, and I made them each a little bit differently. And I'm using the term interactive even though interactive cards aren't really my forte. So just disclaimer here, keep in mind that while I am making, in my opinion, interactive cards, these are not probably the best way to go about making interactive cards. I just did the best that I could with what I could remember from things that I had seen, and I'm one of those that has to look at something like 40 times in order to get it. And so interactive cards, because they take a little bit more thought, sometimes it's a little bit harder for me to grasp. So bear that in mind as you watch this video. So let's go ahead and get started making these cards. To start off, I have cut down 4 panels using the Hit the Slopes die from My Favorite Things, and I'm going to move on to coloring here shortly. I have out my mini Misty along with some Express It cardstock. That is my favorite cardstock to color with. I feel like a bit of a broken record telling you guys that. But that's my favorite to stamp on for Copic coloring because I plan to color these images using Copic markers. So I'm just going to stamp those out using Memento Tuxedo black ink. And I'll stamp those out a couple times to make sure that I have good coverage. I'm going to use one of each of these little images on the 3 cards. There are 2 trees that come in this stamp set, and I wasn't sure exactly how many of them that I wanted, so I just took the liberty of stamping those all over the rest of that cardstock that I had left. I plan to color these images using mostly cooler colors, and I have this sped up about 4 times, so obviously I'm not coloring that quickly on a normal basis. But I've started off with the C5s and the C3 and C1 is what I'm going to be using on these images, using variations of that C on the 3 different images. So I will use a little bit of a darker on that just with using the C5 and then blending that out using the C3. So it's very simple Copic coloring, putting in shadows just where I think they might be. It's nothing perfect, and it's nothing, there's no rocket science to it, and I'm not even really thinking about where my light source actually is going to come from. So I'm just coloring and having a good time. So I wanted to do a little bit of a shout out to my niece. She is so precious. I'm using R20 there right now for their cheeks. But she is so precious. So my sweet little niece, Elena, she likes to watch my videos on occasion. And so I just want to tell her how proud I am of her and how sweet she is to watch my videos. So and she's just not that old, but she's adorable. So hey Elena, you're doing awesome. Keep it up, girl. But back to coloring. I am using the BGs on that particular snowboard, and well, all of them. I kind of stuck to the same sort of color palette for all of them, and I will list those colors down below if I remember to do so. But I had the BG10 and BG23 for the first one, and then BG57 and then BG49 for the second one. And I'm moving on to some yellows for the scarf, and just using that blush tone of R20 for their ears and their cheeks, and that Y20 along with the Y06. It was Y02 and Y06 for their scarf. And then I went ahead and colored that same snowboard using those same colors that I did for the penguins snowboard as well. For the trees, I will use BG96. It's a variation of those blue-greens, but much greener in tone. And I don't end up adding any shadowing to it. I just color all the green color. It's at this point that I decided to start working on the backgrounds and how I was going to get those situated. So I pulled out the slopes that I had cut out previously, and I grabbed some Distress Oxide inks. And the first one that I grabbed was Squeeze Lemonade. And I grabbed my mini ink blending tool, and I am basically just kind of blending that onto the middle, trying to bring that color up a little bit so that it fades out to the top. I just want it to look a little bit yellow over the horizon, or the snowbanks and the horizon. And so I'm just going to keep working that color till I get the look I'm looking for. I thought this looked really different. You know, typically I go with my normal blues in the background, but I thought a yellow background would look kind of fun because, you know, with the snow, and sometimes if you're doing sunrise or sunset colors. So And then I grabbed some of this Peach Bellini by My Favorite Things, and I used that same squeezed lemonade over the middle of that. And I thought, boy, I really like the way that looks. And for the top part, I grabbed the abandoned coral Distress Oxide ink, and I just sponged that all over the top. So it ends up looking like you've got 3 variations of color when you've got that Peach Bellini cardstock along with the squeezed lemonade at the bottom and the abandoned coral at the top. Then I took some Coral Crush cardstock from My Favorite Things along with the Full of Heart stencil, and I taped that to the back with some washi tape, and then I just used the abandoned coral Distress Oxide ink over the top of the stencil just to give some visual texture. I wanted all 3 of these cards to look a little bit different but still be similar, if that makes any sense. So I'm pulling that back and I'm seeing that I just want a little bit more on that left hand side. And when I'm done, I will start working on the slider mechanism for my slopes. So I will decide where I want each of those 3 slopes to be on that first panel, because it will have a cover panel, and then I'll run that through my Big Shot machine, and then I can start working on the placement of these pieces over the top of my cards. I ended up needing, 2 per card, a slope for the back and a slope for the front. And this is not the first card. I'm not going to show you the first card because honestly it was a hot mess by the time all was said and done. The mechanism doesn't work that well because it was a trial and error. So I took that stencil background that I did and I glued that to my card base, and then I am actually running the that's the Essential Slanted Sentiments. I'm just using the very smallest one, and I took a spin and slide disc and I put double-sided tape on both of those. And then I'm just deciding where I want my mechanism, or how I want my mechanism to work. So I have cut out just little circles by hand because I could not find my hole punch, my 1/2-inch hole punch. And so here's where I'm going to put the double-sided tape on both sides of that spin and slide disc. Now, spin and slide discs were not the best choice for this kind of a card. I think that you would just want the slide discs, and so I will link those down below. But I put that on one of those little hand-cut circles, and now I'm going to put some double-sided adhesive on the back of the first panel that will go down, and this is the one that has the slider mechanism on it. And you want this so that your slider can actually move around a little bit, and you need to make sure that you're not getting too close to where the slider will be, otherwise you will hinder the mechanism. And once I'm happy with where I have that, I will reveal or take off the backing paper and I will adhere that down to the front of my card base. And I am leaving about a 1/2 inch on the bottom because that's where the hand slider is going to be. And I'll stick my disc inside the slider mechanism and I will peel off the double-sided tape and I will adhere down that Essential Slanted Sentiment piece because that is going to be what you use for your slider. For me anyway. This was just wanted to try it out. I have a scrap of cardstock there, just a thin scrap of cardstock. I'm using some double-sided tape on the back of that, and I'm going to adhere that over the top of that Essential Slanted Sentiment die. And it's way longer than it needs to be, but that's okay. I will adhere some double-sided tape just to the sides, because if you put it at the bottom or at the top, you won't be able to slide your mechanism. So I'm just putting it on the sides, and I discover I don't need that top piece. It'll show through. So I peel that off, and I will adhere this down once I've peeled off the backing paper. But before I do that, I decide to draw a little arrow so that the recipient knows that you would take that slider and you would move it across the bottom of the panel. So like I said, remove the release paper, put the top slope over, and then as you can see, that will slide back and forth. I know there's a better way to do it, but I just thought this was another fun way, an alternative. And once I've decided where I want my rabbit, my little snowboarding rabbit, I'll trim down my panel, and I'll put some double-sided adhesive on that. Don't put any on your bunny because you might adhere him to the slope and then he won't move. And then I'll stick him down, and then as you can see, he will be able to slide across and snowboard across the card. Just trying to keep it loose. For the third card, because like I said, I'm not showing the second card, this is where I learned from the first card. And so I'm doing almost the same thing. I've got double-sided adhesive that I'm putting on that spin and slide disc. And I will adhere one side of that down to my little hand-cut circle. And the circle just needs to be bigger than your slider mechanism area. Otherwise it'll fall out of there. And so this is where I got to thinking, where did I screw up on the first card? Because this is sort of how I did the first card, except this is the difference. You need to double up your foam tape on the back. So obviously I didn't show you the first one because it was too confusing. And so I peel off that and I just double up the back because I want to make sure that my mechanism can slide just fine on its own. So I'll cover the back of that, leaving enough room for the mechanism to have room to flow. And I'll double up the foam tape. And this is just that Scotch 3M foam tape. I'll have that listed down below as well. And you don't have to worry about, covering up the top and the bottom because this isn't the area where that matters. That'll matter when you put it on to the second panel. So it does make for a fairly thick card when you do this because you do have to add more foam tape on your your top panel, but at least with that one, it's only one layer, so you end up having 3 layers of foam tape. So it's a little bit bulkier of a card, but it's an interactive card, so it makes it a lot of fun. So I'll take off the release paper on that, and then I will adhere that down to my card panel. And then I will stick in my little slider mechanism. Just manipulating that thing in there. Take off the backing paper for that, and like I did before, I'm not going to show you all the steps, but I did the exact same thing with the one before, by making sure that I don't cover my mechanism by using the foam tape. And now I'm just adhering down those trees that I had cut out, just putting a couple on each side so that I can complete the scene. But I ended up liking the way these turned out. I know there's some great interactive card videos out there. I just wanted to show you some different variations. Again, as I've said, total disclaimer, these are not my forte. I am not great at these, but they are fun. And I hope it wasn't too confusing. If you do have any questions, go ahead and leave those down in the comments section below. I would love to know what you think of these. Like I said, I know there are better ones out there. I totally understand that. But I don't know. These were fun. The idea at least is fun. So for the sentiment, I'm going to use the sentiment Happy Birthday, because I told you I'm in total need of birthday cards. And I'm just going to stamp that onto some black cardstock that I have sitting on my desk. I'm using some Simon Says Stamp clear embossing ink, but you could use Versamark ink. That's the same type of ink. And I'm making sure to stamp those out with enough space in between because I plan to use that Essential Slanted Sentiments die over the top of them. I'll cover those with that white embossing powder, and then I will heat those until they are smooth and melted. And then I'll trim those down, and I'll use that Essential Slanted Sentiments and run that through my Sizzix Sidekick for all 3 of them. And once I get all of those cut out, I will start adhering those to the fronts of my cards. Just using some liquid glue. We obviously don't need any more bulk. So this one's only 2 layers thick, and that one slides pretty fun. This first one is the one that I didn't use enough on the bottom, and so he doesn't slide very freely. And then this third one is the one where I used 2 layers and then just 1. So he's pretty bulky, but there they are. So I'd love to know what you think of the cards. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I definitely have plenty more videos planned and coming. And as always, guys, I appreciate you stopping by.